And that's why we have this 8-inch rule. Try to keep your load no more than 8 inches off the ground. That works pretty well most of the time. 8 inches is quite a bit. A lot of people actually shoot for less, which probably isn't necessary. Generally, your load capacity gives you about 188 inches or so on most of your forklifts, but try and keep it low. If it tips off the forks or something catastrophic happens, it lessens that probability of having an issue. Plus, it just keeps you more stable. There are times, however, where you can't keep it really low. Sometimes you're carrying an odd load that you've kind of speared with your forks and you have to pick them up a little bit higher. Also, sometimes with your forks low, if you're going up and down hills in a parking lot type environment, like we have at most of our wear yards, you can't do it. You'll drag your forks, you'll spear the ground. So be cautious of that too, and find that right balance. 8 inches tends to be a pretty good rule, though.
So the 8-inch rule. When you're traveling, your load should be only 8 inches off the ground, or less if at all possible. That's the 8-inch rule. It is a test question. The general idea here is that the higher up my center of gravity on whatever it is that I'm carrying, the less stable it is. So the lower I keep things, the more stable they will be. So keep your load low and slow, and that's kind of the common denominator. Low and slow is good. 8 inches is a great rule, great idea rule. This is less than 8 inches, and that's great if I can do that. There are times where you cannot do that. Driving across these parking lots that we have, they're thrashed and they have uneven surfaces, and sometimes you have to be higher than that. Sometimes your forks are going to be 30 inches in the air because whatever you've grabbed, like a bumper or something, is hanging down below that, and that's okay. It's a guideline. 8 inches is a really good habit to be in. Try and keep it low. The lower the better.
If your view is blocked, drive backwards. It seems really obvious and really simple, but I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody hanging off the side of a forklift looking forward trying to see where they're going. And at some point, you're going to have to do that to maneuver your load into place or use spotters. But if you're traveling a distance and you can't see because of the size of your load, backwards usually fixes that problem for you quite nicely.
Okay. All right, so when you pick up a load on the front of this thing, if you can't see through that load, which you usually can't, in this case, of course, I have nothing on there, but if I have a tall load that affects my ability to see forward, your best bet is not to try and hang out here and look around it. What you want to do is turn around and drive backwards. You have clear view behind you, just drive backwards. Yes, the backup alarm's obnoxious, but at least you can see. Trying to hang out the side and look around it, not your best bet. There are times where you'll have to do that because you'll be moving into a location to stack, but not your best bet if you're traveling a distance you can't see through.
So here's that right angle stacking. The idea here is that you're moving down an aisle and you need to stack onto these stacked loads. So you're going to need to raise your load and then turn it into where it gets stacked. In this case, it looks like he's got plenty of room to approach, but somewhere along the way he had to turn. And if you have to turn with your load raised, especially raised high up into the air, you need to go very slowly. That's the key, is go slowly, because the higher your load is, the less stable it is. Watch that overhead clearance. It's easy to move the forklift around with raised forks or raised load and run into something. I personally have hit a couple sets of lights and a garage door because my forks were raised. Maybe they needed to be, maybe they didn't, but no matter what, I missed it and I hit something. So be cautious. Especially watch for anything that dangles lower than everything else, like lights or cables. As you're operating and you're lifting and lowering your load, watch for chain slack. If those chains are, slapping back and forth, that's usually means there's a problem with the lifting mechanism and they need to be serviced. They need to be serviced by somebody who knows what they're doing. We will bring in a professional forklift mechanic type to do that. We don't do that ourselves.
All right, chain slack. So you have chains both here and down in there and over here. I actually don't like the way that chain is rubbing on there. I'll have to keep an eye on that. So I'm looking for chain slack. As I bring this guy up, it's nice and smooth. All right, as I bring it down, it's nice and smooth. The chains aren't flopping back and forth, there's no chain slack. That's really good. A little bit of flexibility isn't a problem. These things aren't ultra tight. Generally I say don't put your fingers in there, but they move a little. Okay, not very much. You don't want chain slack.
Touched on this before. Those forks are movable. They move side to side. They split and get wider and narrower, and that is so that you can use them for whatever load you have. Try and keep them as wide as possible for the load you're carrying. That gives you the most stability. Take the time to make the adjustments to your forklift or to your forks. The power adjustable one that we have on our primary forklift is great because the mechanical one that you have to go do manually is a pain in the butt. But take the time to make sure your load is stable. It's all about stable load.
Always adjust your forks for maximum stability. In this case, the forks are pretty narrow, right? There's a lot of room that they can widen out. Always make your forks as wide as possible. Purpose being that you spread that out, it's a little more stable. Stable's important in forklifts. Okay? So in this truck, it's got the power setting for the forklift. It's great. In that case, that was anticlimactic. So in this forklift, we have a power setting to adjust your forks. Okay, and there, we've adjusted them out about as maximum as far as it'll go. As far as it'll go is your ideal for stability. On other forklifts, you'll find there'll be a pin sitting here at the top of the fork. Pull that pin up. Sometimes you have to rock the fork to kind of get it to walk over. There's these little notches. It locks into those notches. So they are all adjustable in general. If you don't have the power adjustment, you can at least make an adjustment by hand.
Yeah. So I've never seen anybody actually tie down a load on a forklift ever, but it's a good idea. And there are times where we try and pick up these loose loads that we really shouldn't. The potential for failure there is fairly high. Keep that in mind as you move forward. Wide and long loads, not super common, but it is something we do. We end up picking up a piece of pipe or a really long beam with the forklift and running it around, and your balance is a little bit off sometimes. It's really hard to get it well balanced on there, and when you're making turns, your outside moves quite quickly and it's really hard to see. So go very slow and use a spotter. Have somebody walk with you off to the side to guide you, keep you from running into a building. It's really easy to hit a building with a really wide load like that. unusual loads. So we're probably not usually picking up a van like that and loading it on a lowboy, but we do pick up all kinds of strange loads. A pallet that's been loaded with stuff that maybe isn't well balanced. Um, we pick up random stuff in the yard to clean things up all the time, and it's pretty common for us to do strange loads. We do that often. Think about where the center of gravity for that load is. You know, if you're picking up a van like that, well, where's the motor? Where's the most weight? And adjust how you pick that load up based on where you think that center of gravity is. Take time to feel it out. We also pick up loads and we don't know what they really weigh. So are they within our capacity or are they not? That inch-pound equation gives you all kinds of tools to be able to figure that stuff out. But if your load isn't marked with what it weighs, it makes it really hard to figure that out. It also doesn't necessarily have my center of gravity marked on there. So you kind of have to real gently pick it up and go real slow and make sure that you got a good handle on it. Driving on ramps and inclines. So we have to go up and down a loading dock or up and down a hill. We do this all the time. How much hill is considered a hill? Well, it kind of depends on if you're loaded or unloaded, and all kinds of factors will go into place. But if your truck is empty, you generally reverse up the incline because your drive wheels are those front wheels, and you want to put your load above the drive wheels. So if you're empty, if your truck is empty, drive uphill in reverse and downhill forward. See how the center of gravity is above the fulcrum point or the drive wheels. Now, if your forklift is loaded and you have a load on your forks, you do the opposite. You drive with the load that's on your forks uphill. So you drive forward up the hill and you drive backwards down the hill. The main point there is so that your load doesn't tip off. Also, your center of gravity moves closer and closer to those drive wheels as you put load on the front of that forklift. But the main point there is, keep your load up the hill.
All right, so the idea in what I'm talking about here is that I have a load or I don't have a load on the front of this. At the moment, I don't have a load. We'll just go with that. So if I'm unloaded, I drive with the weighted portion uphill when I'm going up and down hills. So I drive down a hill normally in forward. I drive up a hill backwards. Okay, that way the heaviest part is above the drive tire. The drive tires are going to be my front tires. If I'm loaded and I have a load up here, albeit that load is less than the weight of the main portion of the forklift or truck, I'm going to keep my load uphill so it doesn't fall off. So I would back down a hill and I would drive forward up a hill. So the opposite. Now, at what point do you consider it a hill? You know, here where I'm at now, I have an upper and lower portion of the warehouse facility, and when I drive down to the lower portion, is it enough of a slope? The answer is, well, it depends on what I'm carrying. In general, if I'm carrying a kind of an unstable, really heavy load, I'm probably going to treat it like an incline, and I'll probably drive it down backwards as if I'm loaded.
Forklifts do not side hill. They don't like it at all. Don't turn on a ramp. Forklifts are designed to be driven in a warehouse on a concrete floor that is engineered for forklifts to drive on. And we're going to turn around and immediately not do that because most of what we do involves moving them around our warehouse on maybe concrete or something, and then out into an asphalt parking lot, and quite commonly around and maybe even off that asphalt. Anytime you drive on anything other than good asphalt or concrete, you are outside of the performance run for that forklift. They really do not like to do that. They get stuck very easily. So if you're in any kind of gravel or soft dirt or mud or ice or snow, your likelihood of getting stuck is very high. Um, It'll take all your driving skills to keep from doing that. So try to keep it on the surfaced roads, on the surfaced areas that you're working. Asphalt and concrete preferable. Or you may end up stuck. And if you end up stuck, it's really hard to get you unstuck because that thing weighs 10,000 pounds. It's small, but it's heavy. So, and it's not going to help you much in getting itself unstuck. So it's a pretty dead drag, however you may do it. Um, yeah, really hard to get them unstuck once you get them stuck. Watch out for loading docks. It's pretty easy to drive one off the edge of a loading dock, know where they're at. And while driving straight off, like in this picture, is certainly something that could happen. Getting too close to the edge of one as you're driving, along it is probably just as bad, if not worse, because it's going to tip you over and uh, you may be more prone to roll over or something. So you can actually treat the edges of your surfaced, paved parking lots or concrete similarly to a loading dock. If you tip one edge off the side there, it doesn't take a lot to get your center of gravity out of whack, especially if you have a load on. So loading trailers, this is kind of twofold. The general idea here when we're talking about loading trailers is driving your forklift onto a trailer and dropping your load inside that trailer. We do that in very limited capacity. However, you need to be aware of it because you could end up in that world. At a fire cache, sometimes doing certain projects, maybe hurricane relief or something. I've heard of people operating a forklift and loading trucks. Generally, we're not doing a ton of that, but you could end up doing it. So some of these things are still going to be similar. The other function of loading trailers is we'll be loading a flatbed trailer or something like that from the side while we're in our own parking lots, and we'll be putting usually odd shaped or very strange loads on them. So some of these things are similar, and there are some other hazards to be aware of. So inspect the floor of the trailer, make sure it's going to support the lift truck. If you're driving on it, keep the trailer from moving. That's consistent with driving on it, or if you are trying to load it from outside, the trailer moves too much, it isn't going to work very well for you. Dock plates and boards and ramps are for driving onto the trailer. And that's an example of what we are trying to avoid in this conversation. Well, this does happen, and it's actually happened even locally here. I know a couple of people who've had a forklift fall through the floor of a trailer. We don't, again, do this that often, but remember to be cautious with the loads and getting your loads centered. It's a complex, can be a complex movement of materials trying to get a trailer loaded with a forklift from the side, like an open trailer that you can't drive on. And we probably do more of that than anything else. So when you're parking your lift truck, remember it's still your responsibility. So park it in a good, safe place to put. Use your parking brake. Put your forks on the ground so that nobody trips over them. And don't park it on an incline. If that thing decides to roll, it's really heavy. It's going to hit something and it's going to hit it hard. So when parking, put your forks flat on the ground. It's mostly because it's a tripping hazard. Put it in neutral. Turn the engine off. Set the parking brake. Note how it says remove the key. So in the general forklift warehouse world, people are issued a forklift. They have their forklift. It's their forklift and they're responsible for it. They remove the key to prevent an unauthorized user from using said forklift. In our world, we sometimes will remove the key and put it in the cup holder next to the key, or next to the ignition. But we can't remove the key because it's a shared forklift with everybody. So make sure you set it up, park it correctly for the next person to be able to get in there and use it.
Here, and I'm stopping. My foot's on the brake. Whenever I stop, parking brake on. I put it in neutral. Okay, right there in the middle. So I'm in neutral. I always lower my forks. It's mostly because they're a tripping hazard, but I always lower my forks. Okay. In some older machines, it could have caused damage with the hydraulic systems, but in a newer machine, that's probably not really the problem. They are a tripping hazard, so put your forks on the ground. Okay, generally we're going to pull the key out. That way nobody jumps in here accidentally and turns it on, sort of. And we put them in the cup holder because we do have shared forklifts. They're not dedicated to individual people. OSHA says, that kind of OSHA guideline is it's one forklift, one operator, one set of key. It's in your pocket. You keep it with you. Well, that doesn't work for us. We certify our operators, and only certified operators can operate it, but put it in the cup holder. And
So stay in the truck, keep your seatbelt on. If you knock over a stack or something and it falls down on you, the overhead guard will protect you and keep you from, serious life-threatening damage. I have had, glass light bulbs break and of course fall through, but no big heavy objects that are going to crush you and kill you are going to come through that overhead guard. Stay in your truck, keep your hands and feet inside if you tip something over and crash it upon your head. If your truck's going to tip over, it's amazing how slow it goes. Do not try to jump out and run away. It's not going that slow. You won't make it. Keep your seatbelt on, stay in your seat, go with the truck, grab a hold of the steering wheel, hold on to it, brace yourself with your feet. I usually brace myself with both feet on the brake pedals, on both brake pedals. I've rolled over one forklift, but that would be my recommendation. Get in there and hold yourself in place, let it go, get out after it tips over.
rollover protection here is designed to protect you, right? This is going to support the weight if this thing tips over. Forklifts very rarely tumble over and over. They just tip over on their side. Do not jump. Don't jump out of the forklift and try and run away. This thing weighs 10,000 pounds. If this lands on you, any part of it is going to mess you up bad. So, stay in is the key. If this thing decides to tip over, you want to brace yourself. Hold on to the steering wheel. It's the best thing to hold on to. I personally hit both brake pedals and I just brace myself and I tip over and we crash. And then we deal with the aftermath of that. But the key is to figure out how and find a comfortable spot where you're going to be able to brace yourself, holding yourself against the seat. Wear your seatbelt. Your seatbelt keeps you from trying to jump out and run away from the forklift because it will get you.
Watch out for the other guy. You're the one moving around the big heavy piece of equipment. The other people are potentially walking or driving around in something else, but yours is big, yours is heavy, you can't see that well. Take extra caution knowing that you're limited in your ability to watch for other people. Intersections or exiting and entering buildings are one of those places where you got to take extra caution. Honk your horn when you are coming in and out of a building or coming around a corner. That way people know you're coming. Slow down. I think slow down is probably the most important thing to keep in mind. Use spotters. Have people block roadways. You see it at the grocery store all the time when you're at Costco and they're getting a forklift to take a pallet down. They shut the whole aisleway down until they get it down on the ground. And there's nothing wrong with that.
always hard for people to see you or you to see them coming around corners and in and out of buildings. Okay.
Don't let people under the forks when they're raised. Not only could the mechanism fail and fall on them, whatever your load is could certainly, tip off and fall on them. And that's just not good.
Another rule we have is don't put people underneath the load or underneath the forks, right? Something could fall off of this. What is to keep this from the whole fork system from coming down on my head? Well, it just so happens that with the machine turned off, the controls are locked out, so somebody couldn't do it. But nonetheless, it's a very unsafe place to be. Don't go under there. Don't do what I just did. Don't go under there. With that, it can be kind of a handy tool to try and use as like a jack. I can pick up a four-wheeler with it and get under there and work. And that can work, but to do that you need special tools that block your forklift so that you can't accidentally lower it on you when that happens. We don't have those special tools, so we don't do that. We use the correct tools, jacks and jack stands, to do said things. Or we will have to do something specific for that need. Anyway, it's also not a jack.